What if China's most extreme mega-project designs are not feats of height, but feats of shape? Forms that look impossible on paper, yet hold their ground in the real world. This is less about chasing skylines, more about reading architecture as problem-solving. When the design is the mechanism and the silhouette is the proof. The first surprise comes from Raffles City, Chongqing, where a horizontal skyscraper is suspended between towers, turning airspace into structure and making movement itself part of the building's identity. Then the scale shifts to Gate to the East, an arch-shaped super tall that treats the skyline like a frame, designed to be read from distance, with the city's center literally passing through its geometry. And the boundary moves again at Intercontinental Shanghai Wonderland, where the hotel drops into an abandoned quarry instead of rising above it. An inverted facade that turns the ground itself into the main elevation. How do engineers make these unconventional forms behave against wind, load, vibration, and time without sacrificing safety or function? And what does it reveal when beauty is not decoration, but the logic that holds the entire system together? Stay with this journey as the structure, the trade-offs, and the decisions behind China's most extreme mega-project designs are peeled back. Because once the forms make sense, the world looks different. Chongqing is a megacity engineered by terrain. Steep hills, dense districts, and two major rivers compress the urban footprint until up becomes a planning tool, not a metaphor. Set on a hilly peninsula bounded by the Yangtze and the Jialing, the core city has to solve circulation, access, and skyline identity at once, because the ground plane is never a single, stable level. That is why Chongqing is perfect for this film's thesis. Here, architecture is not a costume placed on top of infrastructure. Form is the mechanism that keeps the city functioning under pressure. When a river is both a shipping corridor and a hard boundary, the design question becomes brutally specific. How do you add capacity without widening the shoreline and breaking the city's edge? The Twin River Bridges concept was conceived as a paired solution for the Yuzhong Peninsula, designed to carry road and rail together so the crossings behave like compact mobility sections, not isolated landmarks. Dongshumen Bridge delivers that idea in its purest form because the structure is literally organized as two decks, one for street life, one for transit, stacked into a single, disciplined silhouette. It spans the Yangtze to connect Yuzhong and Nan'an, making a direct link where geography would otherwise force long detours through a steep, layered street network. Its main span reaches 445 meters, and the total length extends to 858 meters. Numbers that matter here because long spans amplify vibration, wind response, and load choreography across the whole system. On the upper deck, the bridge carries 4 vehicular lanes plus pedestrian walkways. On the lower deck, 2 rail tracks carry Chongqing Rail Transit Line 6, so one structure replaces what could have been 2 separate crossings. That stacked decision is the architectural innovation. It compresses right-of-way, simplifies approaches, and reduces the pressure to carve additional road space out of already vertical neighborhoods. Design notes explain why the form looks the way it does. Conventional cable-stayed options would have demanded towers rising about 170 meters above the deck, a scale judged visually overpowering for the surrounding city. So the selected strategy combines cable-stayed behavior with a truss girder logic, letting shorter towers and a stiffened deck share the work, which is why the bridge reads as sleek rather than top-heavy. Even the 2-deck silhouette becomes a statement. Chongqing does not merely cross obstacles. It stacks solutions until movement itself becomes part of the skyline. And once that mindset clicks, space saved through stacking, the next mega project nearby takes the same principle and turns it into an inhabitable piece of air. As the bridge stacks movement into 2 levels, your sightline keeps drifting toward the confluence ahead, where the city's next move is not another crossing, but building in the air between towers. Safdie Architects frames Raffles City Chongqing as a vertical neighborhood, which is a quiet but radical claim. The project succeeds only if connections between parts feel inevitable, not imposed. The design decision that makes it impossible is also the simplest to describe. It treats the void between towers as usable territory, turning airspace into the primary public room of the project. That is the Crystal, a 300-meter-long horizontal skyscraper set at a height of 250 meters, built not as a symbolic bridge, but as fully programmed architecture. Because it is fully programmed, it must behave like a real building in motion. Structure, comfort, and vibration control are not hidden engineering tasks. They are the reason the form can be occupied with confidence. The firm describes it as housing over 10,000 square meters of amenities, which turns a skyline gesture into a destination that can hold people, dwell time, and real operations day after day. The larger strategy is urban, not cosmetic. In an area with limited parks, the development provides over 30,000 square meters of public space, using the podium and sky-level connections to manufacture civic room where the ground is scarce. Even the access logic is architectural. The project integrates multiple entry points aligned to the city's undulating topography, And a new public walkway cuts through 5 retail levels to reconnect the upper city to the waterfront. So the silhouette becomes proof of intent. The shape is not decoration. It is a readable diagram of how density can stay livable when the city can only grow by layering. Across the waterline, Chongqing makes the same argument again, this time through culture, using a building whose skin turns light, reflection, and function into one controlled image. The Chongqing Grand Theater sits on a headland above the Yangtze, directly opposite the business district. So its job is not just to host performances, it is to hold the riverfront as a civic landmark at city scale. GMP's concept solves a classic contradiction. It uses a heavy stone platform base to anchor the building, while a sculptural glass form above it creates the illusion of hovering close to the water. That is not stylistic theater. It is a structural and spatial strategy, because performance venues demand strict planning discipline, even when the exterior wants to look effortless. The glass shell is complexly angled and refractive, so the building's appearance changes with water light and city light, producing new moods without relying on screens or spectacle. Where openness is needed, the glass works as a climatic skin that keeps views in play. Where concealment is required, a second massive shell provides protection, keeping the form expressive without compromising performance needs. Inside, the plan is organized like a ship's keel line, 2 concert halls aligned along a longitudinal axis, so visitors intuitively understand orientation, even in a very large building. With a gross floor area of 100,000 square meters and a grand hall seating capacity of 1,744, the architecture has to work as a crowd machine as much as a skyline icon. What makes the theater's exterior feel truly engineered is its layered glass skin, an angled, faceted envelope that turns reflections into geometry and keeps the building legible at city scale. But the design goes further. At night, programmable LED lighting across that facade can choreograph color and patterns, so the whole building reads like a luminous screen facing the river, not just a lit landmark. In the Chongqing chapter, this completes the triad: mobility stacked into one bridge, density stacked into one connected skyline, and identity stacked into one luminous cultural object. Taken together, these forms show what impossible really means in this city. Not height for its own sake, but architectural stacking as strategy, compressing capacity, public space, and symbolism into silhouettes that earn their logic. Once you see Chongqing this way, the next city's icons stop looking like daring shapes and start reading like hard decisions made visible. What does a mega project become when its most extreme ambition is not adding another spire, but cutting a precise void into the skyline and forcing that absence to behave like structure? Gate to the east answers with a single architectural gamble. Two super tall legs locked into an arch, so the opening is not leftover air, but the main facade the city is meant to read. At 1.8 meters tall and designed by RMJM, the building's scale matters mainly because the larger the outline gets, the less forgiveness the form has for drift, sway, or sloppy load paths. That is why its placement is part of the mechanism. Records describe the site as the point where Suzhou's historic east-west axis meets the west bank of Jinji Lake, turning geometry into a piece of urban direction finding. Even the arrival logic is compressed into the same footprint, with Dongfang Jimen Station, an interchange for Line 1 and Line 3, positioned right beside the landmark, so the icon is tied to everyday circulation, not isolated spectacle. When night falls, the arch simplifies into pure outline, and the void becomes an intentional darkness that makes the frame look even more absolute against the lake. Then the facade reveals a second identity. Official reporting on the Jinji Lake area notes 13,000 full-color LED fixtures, turning the surface into a programmable field that can render the colorful door effect. Because the lighting is controlled as a coordinated system rather than a few floodlights, it can shift through transitions, trace edges, and carry simple graphics or short messages without breaking the clarity of the form. The most architectural choice is restraint, keeping the opening comparatively quiet, so light does not distract from the idea of a gateway. It sharpens it by letting contrast do the work. Completed in 2016, the project fits the film's thesis perfectly. Beauty here is not decoration at all, but legible logic, shape as wayfinding, and silhouette as proof. Shanghai is a city written by water and trade, built along the Huangpu as a global port, then rewritten in Pudong as a financial district that had to invent a skyline fast. In that race for legibility, the real question becomes architectural. How do you give a city a signature shape that also performs against wind, soft ground, and relentless urban pressure? What does a skyline look like when a landmark is designed less as a building and more as a rhythm? Pearls suspended on a structural spine, meant to be understood in one glance. The Oriental Pearl Tower answers with 11 steel spheres of different sizes threaded along 3 main columns, a form inspired by the pearls on a jade plate image often cited in its design story. At 468 meters tall, the tower does not merely rise above Lujiazui, it punctuates it, turning broadcasting infrastructure into a public-facing symbol of the new Pudong era. That symbolism still has to behave like engineering, because the tower sits on soft riverbank soils, so construction relied on deep concrete foundations and heavy structural support to keep the silhouette stable. The spheres are not decorative bubbles. They are occupied platforms, which means the architecture is forced to reconcile spectacle with program. Observation, circulation, and services stacked inside a shape the city can recognize instantly. Built between 1991 and 1994, it became one of the earliest megascale signals that Pudong was no longer a promise, but a constructed reality with a new visual grammar. From the riverfront, the form reads like a diagram. The columns declare stability, the spheres declare public life, and the whole composition declares intent. Shanghai is now broadcasting its future in 3 dimensions. And once a skyline has learned the power of a bold shape, the next generation does something even more radical. Instead of adding another object, it subtracts space and dares the void to stand up. That is the bridge to the next icon in the same Lujiazui cluster, where the defining feature is a cutout at the top, engineered as both structure and message. What happens when an extreme form is defined not by what you build, but by what you remove? An opening so large that wind, sway, and structural continuity become the whole design brief. Shanghai World Financial Center rises 492 meters, and its most distinctive move is the trapezoid aperture near the top, negative space turned into a legible signature. The idea began as a 46-meter circular opening intended to reduce wind pressure stresses, a clean piece of structural logic that also carried cultural symbolism in its geometry. That circle was later replaced by a trapezoid, partly to resolve controversy, but also because the revised shape was described as cheaper and easier to implement, proving that iconic still answers to constraints. In architectural terms, the aperture is not a gimmick. It is a stress management decision made visible, letting the skyline read the engineering rather than hiding it behind a smooth cap. The payoff is clarity at city scale. From far away, the tower becomes a marker you can navigate by, because the silhouette communicates a single, unmistakable gesture. Opened in 2008, it effectively redefined the Pudong skyline from tall things into shapes with arguments, where form is expected to justify itself with performance. And once you accept that a void can be engineered into the top of a tower, The next question is even harder. What if the entire skin of the tower becomes the mechanism? That is where the story turns to Shanghai Tower, because instead of cutting a hole, it twists the whole body so wind and identity are solved together. Shanghai Tower rises 632 meters, but its signature is the slow twist, an architectural decision that treats wind not as an afterthought, but as the shape's primary client. That rotation, often described as about 120 degrees from base to top, reduces wind loads and allows the tower to stay slender and readable without paying for brute force structure alone. The double-skin facade strategy pushes the same idea further. The exterior is not just a wrapper, but a performance layer that supports comfort, efficiency, and the sensation of moving through a vertical city. In the Lujiazui trio, each landmark teaches a different lesson. Spheres that broadcast identity, a void that makes stress visible, and a twist that turns the entire envelope into an aerodynamic argument. The result is a skyline that feels less like decoration and more like decision-making rendered at full scale. In Shanghai, impossible is not simply building higher, it is designing shapes that solve real constraints, then making those solutions legible enough to become the city's identity. Once you can read the logic in these silhouettes, the series thesis locks in. Beauty is not ornament. It is the mechanism made visible, and the skyline becomes proof. Harbin Opera House. What does a performance hall become when the landscape is the brief, where the building must look carved by weather, yet operate with the precision of a machine? Harbin Opera House rises from the wetlands of Harbin Cultural Island along the Songhua River, designed by mad architects as a landmark that reads like terrain rather than a standalone object. The exterior is an undulating, snow-bright shell of white aluminum panels that wraps the complex in one continuous gesture, so the silhouette feels inevitable against the city's harsh northern climate. At roughly 79,000 square meters, the project holds a grand theater of about 1,600 seats and a smaller theater of about 400, compressing multiple venues into one readable form. Its key architectural idea is continuity. The same sweeping surface binds the major volumes and the public plaza, making circulation feel like a carved path through a single mass. That continuity is also strategy. Rather than stacking separate icons, the design uses one dominant envelope to turn a cultural campus into an instantly legible destination on the river's edge. Inside, the mood flips from ice white to warmth, with a sculpted timber stair sequence that pulls visitors upward like a wooden canyon leading toward the main hall. The Grand Theater's wood-lined interior is shaped for performance discipline, acoustics, sightlines, and crowd flow, while bright lobby spaces and skylight-like openings keep the building feeling open rather than sealed. In the language of this series, it is beauty as logic, a dramatic form that earns its presence by making landscape, circulation, and performance function read as one system. What happens when a city decides that its most important new monument is not a museum or a tower, but a place where raw computing power becomes part of the skyline? Chengdu's supercomputing center is conceived as a lakeside civic marker in Tianfu area, using a park-like setting to make infrastructure feel like an urban destination rather than a fenced-off utility. The signature move is the silicon cube, a crystalline volume about 20 meters on each side, presented as the centerpiece so the building's identity is literally organized around the machine. Instead of hiding that core behind opaque walls, the design places it inside a transparent glass enclosure, turning a typically private industrial program into something legible from the outside. That decision reframes the architecture as a public explanation. A glass promenade and viewing route are described as wrapping the cube, so the form communicates scale and seriousness without needing technical jargon. The site planning reinforces the same idea, using changes in elevation to separate open public movement from controlled operational zones, so access and security are solved by layout rather than heavy visual barriers. A spiraling sky bridge stitches the complex into its surroundings, linking the city edge to the lakeshore and turning going past the building into a designed moment of arrival. Even the outer envelope speaks in computing language. Descriptions emphasize pixel-like facade units that reference the binary logic of 0 and 1, so the skin itself becomes part of the story the drone can capture. And when lighting takes over at night, the curtain wall and facade system can act like a luminous display plane, turning the center into a calm, city-scale signal, proof that here, the beauty is the mechanism made visible. What if a grand theater refused to be a tower and instead became a piece of landscape, wide, low, and shaped to feel like water settling into the city? Jiangsu Grand Theater is placed in Nanjing's Hexi Development Corridor on the cultural and sports axis by the Yangtze, where a landmark has to work at the scale of an entire district. Its defining exterior idea is conceptual clarity. Project descriptions frame the complex as lotus leaf and water drops, using multiple rounded volumes gathered on an elevated platform, so the whole site reads as one composition from above. Instead of separating building and ground, the massing is treated as artificial topography, sloping edges, sheltered pockets beneath outward-leaning forms, and planted surfaces that soften the boundary between architecture and park. That prostrate district-scale footprint matters because the project is enormous, reported at a total construction area of 271,400 square meters. So the architecture has to communicate order and calm without relying on height. In that sense, the unique design is strategic rather than decorative, a cultural megaproject made legible as a single landform, where the silhouette itself explains the goal, turning a complex program into a simple, readable identity for the riverfront district. 1,000 trees of Shanghai. What does an impossible megaproject look like when the goal is not a taller tower, but a man-made landscape, architecture that behaves like topography and still performs like a disciplined machine? "1,000 Trees sits on a bend of Suzhou Creek beside the M50 Art District, transforming a former industrial riverside edge into a new urban frontage. The headline idea is simple but radical. Two mountain forms rise from the waterfront, capped with greenery, so the skyline reads as terrain rather than stacked boxes. Instead of hiding the structure that makes this geometry possible, the project expresses a grid of columns as trees, each supporting a planter, so the load-bearing system becomes the visual identity. That choice solves a real design problem at district scale. It breaks down a huge mixed-use mass into a field of repeated elements, making the building feel readable and human-scaled from the Riverwalk. On a site of about 6 hectares, the first phase emphasizes everyday use: shops, cafes, restaurants, and public promenades. So the mountain is not just an object, but an active piece of city life. The planning is deliberately connective, integrating an existing riverside park and a heritage structure, so the project reads as a stitched extension of the neighborhood rather than a sealed enclave. From the water, the terraces can feel intentionally ambiguous at first, more cliff than facade. Then the repeated planters and columns resolve the image into a constructed forest held up by concrete logic. The broader payoff is urban, not cosmetic. The development manufactures public realm along the creek, pulling foot traffic and attention into an area that previously read as back of house Shanghai. In this series' terms, it is silhouette as proof. 1,000 planted caps are not decoration added later, but the visible consequence of a structural decision that turns infrastructure into landscape. Ring of life. What does a mega project become when its primary job is not to add more floor area, but to give a new district an instant, unmistakable silhouette that can be understood at a glance? Ring of Life in Fushun was positioned in Shenfu New Town as a civic signal, an object meant to announce place and direction before the surrounding fabric fully matures. The architectural move is pure and uncompromising. A monumental steel ring stood upright, so the void is treated as deliberately built, not leftover sky. At about 157 meters tall, the scale stops being a graphic logo and starts behaving like structure, which is why the form relies on a steel framework that carries forces around a continuous curve. That continuity is the real design logic. Rather than competing with towers, the ring creates a landmark by subtraction, turning negative space into a district-scale reference point. The program stays intentionally simple from the outside. An observation deck accessed by elevator makes the ring function like a viewing device, not a conventional building with a facade and rooms to read. Once that role is set, the payoff becomes urban strategy. Planners are described as pivoting from abandoned entertainment concepts toward a sightseeing landmark designed to pull attention and visitors toward the new town plan. When night lighting takes over, the geometry becomes even more literal, with about 12,000 LED lights turning the ring into a programmable halo that can shift mood without changing form. The trade-off is also part of the story. The Ring of Life is largely symbolic, which is exactly why it attracts both praise and criticism, because it treats identity itself as infrastructure. In the logic of this series, it is a clean case of beauty as mechanism, a single shape that solves a wayfinding and branding problem at full scale, using silhouette as proof. What does a media mega project look like when the goal is not to dominate the skyline with height, but to turn a continuous loop into a readable public symbol of communication? Phoenix Center in Beijing, also known as the Phoenix International Media Center, sits at the southwest edge of Chaoyang Park, shaped as a torus-like loop, often described as a Mobius-inspired form. At 55 meters tall, it relies on geometry rather than altitude. The void is the headline, and the building's identity comes from framing space instead of filling it. The exterior is conceived as a steel and glass lattice, wrapped in a double-skin strategy, so the facade can stay visually transparent while still supporting comfort and efficiency across a large broadcasting campus. That loop is not only a sculptural gesture, it is also an urban device. Parts of the ring lift from the ground to create entrances and a public courtyard, pulling movement through the site and linking street life to the park edge. With a total floor area of about 65,000 square meters, the project's real architectural achievement is strategic clarity. It makes a complex media program legible as one continuous form, turning infrastructure into a city-scale landmark without needing to be the tallest object in view. What does a mega project look like when the goal is not another vertical needle, but a three-dimensional loop that makes an entire media headquarters work as one continuous system? The China Central Television headquarters in Beijing was conceived by OMA as an alternative to the exhausted skyscraper typology, replacing the single tower with a connected form that is meant to be read as one object. That object is a cranked loop, two leaning volumes joined by a large overhang, so the most dramatic part of the building is not height, but the act of bridging open air with occupied structure. The loop culminates in a cantilever described by OMA as about 75 meters, and that single decision forces everything else, load paths, stiffness, and construction sequencing, to become part of the architecture's identity. Because Beijing is a high seismic intensity context, Arup's structural description emphasizes an external skin of leaning columns and triangulated bracing, forming a diagrid-like closed tube, built for robustness rather than cosmetic novelty. That diagrid is not hidden. It is expressed on the facade, turning the building's pattern of forces into a visible graphic, so the silhouette reads like engineered logic instead of a smooth, generic curtain wall. The loop is also an organizational strategy. The structure is meant to keep departments and production functions within short distances along a continuous circuit, making communication a spatial design principle, not a slogan. At roughly 234 meters tall, the building's cultural impact comes less from altitude and more from the unmistakable void and bridge geometry. So strong it even earned a popular nickname in local conversation. In the language of this series, it is a flagship example of beauty as mechanism, a form that looks impossible on paper, yet stands up in the real world because the architecture is built directly out of structural necessity. What does an impossible megaproject look like when a historic capital wants a modern financial skyline, but the design still has to feel disciplined rather than generic? Zifeng Tower rises as Nanjing's defining vertical marker, using a tapering, stepped silhouette that reads like a controlled ascent instead of a simple glass needle. At about 450 meters, the scale is obvious, but the architectural statement is subtler. The massing is shaped to transition and thin out, so the tower feels resolved rather than merely tall. That thinning is not decoration, it is the tower's organizing logic, with the profile stepping and shifting as the program changes, so form becomes a readable map of how the building works. Because the form is doing real work, the exterior avoids visual noise and leans on proportion, taper, and a crisp crown, letting the skyline read the building from far away with minimal explanation. The site strategy reinforces that clarity. Authoritative tall building records describe the complex as mixed use, anchored by a dominant main tower set on a podium condition. So the landmark is tied to an urban base, rather than floating as an isolated object. In practical terms, that base-to-tower relationship matters because it turns a super tall into a district tool, an address that concentrates offices, hospitality, and supporting activity into one legible center. And in visual terms, the step-back geometry helps the tower avoid the wall effect that many supertalls create, breaking bulk into a sequence that reads more like a composed skyline than a single massive slab. Completed in 2010, it became the city's shorthand for a new era of scale, proof that Nanjing could project modern ambition while still insisting on an ordered silhouette. In the language of this series, Zifeng's uniqueness is strategic. The beauty is not surface styling, but a massing logic that turns program, skyline identity, and structural discipline into one readable form. What does an impossible megaproject look like in Shenzhen when the city's financial core needs a landmark that reads as strategy, not just height? Ping An Finance Center rises in Futian as a headquarters-scale anchor for the central business district, designed by Kohn Pedersen Fox to be read as one clean, unmistakable figure. At 599 meters, the tower's real architectural move is discipline, a sharpened, tapering profile that treats wind as the primary client, so the silhouette stays controlled at extreme scale. That discipline carries into the exterior, where the skin is conceived to look precise and almost metallic in its clarity, letting the building feel like a single engineered object rather than a stack of unrelated parts. Behind that calm image is a straightforward big-picture mechanism. A stiff perimeter and core work together to keep sway, vibration, and load paths predictable, so the form can stay legible instead of overbuilt and bulky. The trade-off is part of the story too. The tower was once planned with a taller spire, but the design was adjusted to respect nearby airspace constraints, proving that even icons negotiate with real-world limits. Completed in 2017, it became the clearest statement of Shenzhen's scale and intent. Not an ornamental flourish, but a measured, high-performance landmark for a city built on speed and organization. In this series' language, it is beauty as mechanism at full height, where the skyline impact comes from readable logic, and the silhouette itself is the proof. What does an impossible megaproject look like when the boldest move is not rising above the city, but dropping into the earth and treating depth as the main elevation? Intercontinental Shanghai Wonderland is built into the wall of an abandoned quarry, turning a scarred industrial void into a deliberate piece of architecture that reads like an inverted skyline. The core design idea is simple and radical. Instead of competing for height, the hotel makes the cliff face its facade. So rock becomes context, structure becomes narrative, and the ground becomes the roofline. That choice immediately creates the real problem to solve: how to make a vertical hospitality building behave when the site is a steep excavation with water, weathering, and long-term stability risks. The project's strategy is to treat engineering as architecture, stabilizing the quarry walls, controlling drainage, and managing groundwater are not hidden tasks, but the conditions that make the form possible. Because most of the volume sits below the rim, the building can rely on the quarry's mass to buffer noise and temperature swings, while its terraces and glazing keep it visually open to sky and water. From the outside, the step profile does the heavy lifting. Each level becomes a ledge in the cliff, breaking a large program into readable layers instead of one overwhelming slab. That layered reading is also a public-facing promise. Rooms, promenades, and viewing edges are arranged so the quarry is not something to ignore, but something to look into, like an amphitheater made by geology and industry. In plan terms, the hotel behaves like a vertical street turned inward, where circulation, service access, and safety routes must be carefully organized because the ground level is no longer the main reference. The most important safety story is not drama, it is discipline. Fire egress, maintenance access, and controlled boundaries have to be designed for a site where steep faces and water are always present. Architecturally, this is why the building feels so controlled from the air. Clean, horizontal bands against rough stone. Because the geometry is doing wayfinding and risk management at the same time. At nearly 90 meters of depth and with 16 levels set below grade, the project proves a broader point. Extreme form is achievable when the mechanisms are designed first, and the beauty is allowed to follow. The trade-off is equally clear. The more the design depends on rock, water control, and long-term upkeep, the more operations and maintenance become part of the architecture's true cost. And that is what makes the Wonderland concept fit this series perfectly. An inverted megaproject where the silhouette is not decoration, but the visible consequence of choosing depth, constraint, and engineering logic as the design language.